Yes.
Here we go. This is That Dirty Hippie. First one, officially. We've done several practices, Joseph, and we've really have some, it's like when David Bowie died, when all these demos were in the vault that would never been listened to, unkept, all this material. I feel like maybe one day, hopefully one day, there'll be a similar type of in the vault demo like experience
No.
for,
There
for
will
those
be.
tapes.
No. Sorry.
One could only hope. We have a couple topics picked out, but we're here in Mountain Standard Time, recording this on July 22nd, and it is late in the evening. And let me tell you, it is legitimately July now, because as the planet has been cooked in a large microwave, we've been we've had this. It's like you have the lid on the pot, and there's just been steam and water, and it's like just kind of a boil. It's just been all this moisture. But now you can walk down the street and you can hear people. They've got the doors open. They're watching TV. Now, isn't that summertime? That's the summer I want to know.
I really love that.
It kind of makes me think of like older movies in the summertime. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen Rear Window. Have you ever seen Rear Window?
No. Who's in it?
Uh, a Jimmy Stewart, and he plays the guy in the wheelchair. You obviously know a bit of the story because it's been done a few times um,
Oh,
over the years. But so Jimmy Stewart, he's this old photographer guy, right? And he's getting up there in years, and he breaks his leg. So he's in a wheelchair, and he's like really can't do much by himself. He's got this broken leg, and meanwhile he's dating in this movie only Grace Kelly, the most gorgeous woman walking walking the earth, and he has commitment issues with her. In some ways. But anyway, he gets staring. It's like the middle of summer, dead heat, and all he can do is just sit in that wheelchair and watch what's happening across the street at like the neighbors looking in these apartment buildings. And he thinks that he witnesses a murder
oh,
in one of the rooms. It's kind of implied. He doesn't. I shouldn't have said witnessed a murder. He's gotten wise. He thinks that these things he's seen add up to the husband is involved in something nefarious, and it's Alfred Hitchcock. It's
oh, really?
yeah. It's I might be my favorite Hitchcock for just if you want to sit down and watch, as opposed to like a Psycho or Vertigo or something.
Right.
Uh,
Does it have
yeah, no.
amazing sequels like other Hitchcock movies?
Um,
How about more renditions? Are there extraordinary renditions of a similar plot?
well, well, Christopher Reeve was in a remake.
I didn't know that.
So Christopher Reeve, after he had that accident, right, where he was now doomed to a wheelchair, he played that character in, I believe, I'm not sure if they called it Rear Window but they did the same plot essentially.
Was that guy Superman? Is that who Christopher
Yes,
Reeve is? Yeah, of course. Of course.
yeah, and the grand irony of Superman being,
Bound to a
um,
wheelchair for the last half of his life.
yeah, not so super on the horse.
The only scene I remember from Superman was when he lost his powers and he stuck his hand in a fire and it burned.
Yeah, I'm not even too. I have maybe seen the first one, but I have not gone
Oh,
through
and
these.
then, of course, there's the famous scene of Lois Lane getting buried in gravel, and Superman is so distraught that spins the world backwards so that he can save her. He
Yeah.
reverses time by spinning around or flying around the world fast enough in the opposite direction that everything reverses and he saves her.
Yeah. Um, I thought that was about as clever as Ferris Bueller driving backwards to lower the the mileage on the vehicle.
Well, cars used to work like that. That used to happen. You could do that
Is
in
that
some.
true?
I think the contention was that model specifically that it wouldn't have worked, but I might be wrong on that.
Yeah. If that's true, then I kind of look like a Gomer there. But I didn't watch. I didn't really get. I just remember the first few minutes of the first Superman and that part, like going around the Earth very quickly. And then, of course, I've dabbled into Richard Pryor's. I think that was Superman 3. Richard Pryor's in it.
Oh yeah, I love that one. Um, is that's the one where he saves a baseball game by uh, like crash landing a jumbo jet nose first into the pitcher's mound. Is that right? Is that Superman 3? I think it is.
I want to say so. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a there's a song that I've been in love with since I was probably like 12 or 13. It's by Jack's Mannequin that's on that soundtrack. It's called Meet Me at My Window. It's a pretty good song for being in one of the shittiest superhero movies ever made.
I can't place the song. I don't think I've
Oh, you
heard the
wouldn't.
song.
It's
Yeah.
it's too hipster. It's not hippie enough, but
Mm.
no, it's really good.
Was it new wave? It was right up your. Was it like Devo or something? Was it?
Well, let's say it's somewhere between May and Death Cab for Cutie.
Oh, well, that
Jack
sounds.
Mannequin.
So speaking of jokes, so right before we went and started recording, I told the joke. Well, hey, alternative metal band Tool is releasing their first album in 13 years next month, which means you can expect a flood of posts on your social media from all your weird friends.
That's the punchline.
I don't know.
That's as far as you got.
Man, I wrote a bunch of these very quickly. Like I only could give myself an hour to do these.
I appreciate your discipline.
Um, a 4-year-old Australian boy, Billy Campbell, claims he is the reincarnation of Princess Diana. The boy has convinced a lot of people too, his parents, grandparents, and even Prince Charles. He's so convinced that he invited the boy for a drive through some tunnels in Paris. It's all cheap and easy. There's nothing cleverly crafted about these at all. But
Well,
my Oprah joke last week was universally disliked,
oh, what was it?
except by all the male people I told. Um, a new study shows that West Virginia is the fattest state in the United States. The second fattest, wherever Oprah Winfrey is.
That's actually pretty good. I like that.
And there are people commenting, that is mean, all caps. Of course, everybody loves Oprah.
I don't. I don't like Oprah specifically, particularly. I don't know what.
Don't you get some Oprah beef?
Yeah, we'll start some Oprah beef. Sure.
Well, the
I'm
beef,
more into the Oprah for young men, Joe Rogan. That's my cup of tea.
well, the beef people were the first not to really like Oprah.
The what?
The
Oh,
beef, the beef industry.
I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And what did we get but Dr. Phil, who is actually really smart, but you just tend not to believe he's really smart.
Because he doesn't sound very smart.
Right. But he shoots from the hip, okay? He's Phil McGraw. I'm going to tell you how it is, not how you want it to be.
Perfect.
Right?
Well, as we're talking about movies, well, I mean, we were talking about movies, and this segue would have worked about 2.5 minutes ago. What movies are we here to talk about today?
Well, it's funny because last week we thought was going to be the first one, and I was really pumped about how it all happened, and I started with a little excerpt from the James Bond novel Thunderball that I thought was really just kind of funny in some ways. And it wasn't long afterward that there was this news revealed, big news. And I have certainly some thoughts about it.
Well, to correct the record, actually, it wasn't a reveal; it was a rumor that was.
Still a rumor,
Yeah,
yes.
it's not actually confirmed.
No, no. Um, yes, so I did some digging. So this has to do with, I believe her name is Lashina Lynch. Uh, she will play 007 in the Bond 25 movie that is set to be released in 2020, I believe the spring, maybe in some places in Europe, February, March. Um, and of course, due to her, for one, and then in some ways how it gets discussed now, also because of her ethnicity. Uh, she will be a black woman playing 007, which when most people hear that, they would immediately think that she's going to be the next James Bond. But Daniel Craig will play James Bond. But this obviously sparked a lot of headlines and some good think pieces.
Well, okay, but
So
I'm
there's the queue up.
conversation relatively blind with just some simple, good questions.
Yes, yeah. Why don't we start it like that?
But to clarify even further for the audience, what is the difference between James Bond and 007?
Yes. So in the so I'm going to play in this role the person who knows a bit about Bond. Just so you know. Okay. Because I'm unfamiliar. Years back in high school, I wrote a series of James Bond film reviews for a Bond forum. Not they didn't ask me; it wasn't for the Bond. I distributed them and posted them on a wall that got some lovely feedback from the locals, and I'm pretty familiar with the novels. So the difference is that in the British Secret Service, I guess, there are a rank of double O's. So, for example, there is 009, there's 0012, 00, presumably, no one knows how many double O's there are. But Bond is one of the double O's. You earn your double O. It is a like being a general or commander in some respects. You achieve this rank, and there in the novels a way that you achieve the rank. If I remember it, one of them was killing in cold blood, and it would be one of the only times Bond ever does that is to achieve his double O, and it's referenced to in the books. You don't experience it as it happens, but it is a position after Bond. There would be another 007. And the rumor is that the movie is going to begin with Bond at retirement and far and away before He's called back. And there was I just found this so funny because this is how the rumor essentially got revealed, was from this movie insider. And this was the quote. So it goes over that Lashina Lynch will take over the famous code name. And the quote was, a movie insider said, quote, there's a pivotal scene at the start of the film where M says, come in 007, and in walks Lashina, who is black, beautiful, and a woman. Quote, it's a popcorn dropping moment. Bond is still Bond, but he's been replaced as 007 by this stunning woman. It's like, first of all, this movie is not coming. It's coming out several months from now. But it's like, you've already ruined the popcorn dropping moment. No one's going to drop. You've revealed it. You've taken away any popcorn dropping moment.
I don't know what you expected, Menzies. Like, how are they going to market it without letting you know that? Like, this isn't Darth Vader revealing himself. This is the arc in the story that it hell, I mean, like, what would be a real arc is if she wasn't 007 by the end of the movie, and then the role would be just as useless as they've already made it out to be.
So mostly I agree with you. There's an idea, and I went back rolling through some of what the conversation is about this, and some people are a little annoyed that it's a bit of a gimmick, and there is some voiced opinion about the what the character should look like. Should it be a man? I mean, I remember a few years ago it was a much bigger story about could there be a black man as Bond. Now, obviously, what we've said so far is that she isn't Bond, and we get that. But there is an attempt to kind of make this, I guess, a modern 2019 Bond. Part of this, what came out of this, was saying that you can no longer refer to Bond girls as Bond girls. They will be Bond women from now on. Now, it's also been said about this movie that what is Bond going to try and do when he realizes he'll be working with a 007, who is a woman? He's going to try and seduce her. Come on. We know this is going to happen. So look, they're going to get together in the movie. They're going to, and why not? She's a 00. She's a dangerous woman. I mean, it's a spy movie, for Christ's sakes. I mean, there might be some dangerous things happening, and while that happens, some sex. I mean,
well, is James Bond's partners in the movies traditionally dangerous women, or do they fit a few different types of roles?
No, because there are a few for sure. They are they can most of the time be also part of the villain side. That's kind of part of it as well. There's often times where he has certain partners, but he doesn't have one that he shares a lot of screen time with, so to speak. They're more periphery. But there was definitely one I can think of off the top of my head, and that would be Tomorrow Never Dies, the second Pierce Brosnan movie, and Hua Lin is essentially his partner, and they then at the end of the movie, in the water, while they're in the water for like 30 seconds, like, you got to think they're like drowning. They have this very emotional makeout in the water that I think probably hurt everybody's lungs just looking at it. But
well, did you actually watch Skyfall?
yeah, I've seen Skyfall. I have not seen Skyfall for a couple of years.
Well, then, at the beginning of that movie, when Bond goes missing and contemplates returning to MI5, his partner, while they're in the Middle East, when he gets shot off a train and lands in some water, I think is what happens. His partner there, at least during that mission, was a black woman.
Mm-hmm.
So I, I guess I understand, but she wasn't the love interest of that movie at all.
No, I don't think so. And I'm sure, and that's kind of another detail about this that I don't like. Like, it's going to begin again where Craig is off somewhere and they got to rope him back in to, save the day. Apparently, 007, not up to snuff. James, we need you. Come on. Like, I get it. I'm a little surprised he is fulfilling the contract, just because I'm pretty sure he was done at the end of the last one. And I mean, fair enough. He's getting old. Um, he's in his 50s. I think he's the second oldest Bond.
Really? Next to
Yeah,
who?
Roger Moore. Roger Moore finished at 57 in A View to a Kill in 85.
Wow. Okay. Um,
I'm pretty sure I have that right.
so Daniel Craig's position is up, if we were to summarize,
Yeah.
and looking for a replacement in 2019 can be a tricky thing, especially because it's almost expected that any traditional roles that can be fulfilled by a different type of person is eager to be filled, much like, and I don't mean to equate these two things, but Men in Black, um, Ghostbusters, um, Ocean 7, right?
Mhm.
So there's there's a lot of these movies that when there's an opportunity to change something, um, that that can tell the same story again, uh, but appeal to a different audience, or perhaps trade roles around so that the um, effort for equality and diversity is noticeable. And okay, so forming an argument that I'm confident that you'll end up making for yourself, but I think I'll try to generalize, and then you can sort of sort out your points on it. Is that James Bond? Well, the role of 007 shouldn't be fulfilled by anyone other than its classic interpretation of a white man. Not because a white man is the only one that can do it properly, but because the character itself doesn't benefit at all from changing like diverse viewpoints. And I think if I would go so far to say that you also don't think that Bond itself should be um, around at this point at all. It's not viewed as this eternal sort of um, epic that continues on and on in a way that you would expect a lot of other British style dramas to remain relevant. One of my first connections that I make to James Bond, because it's British in nature, is actually Doctor Who, and that can kind of tell you just how limited my knowledge is of British cinema and of the novels that came out of that era. But there's this character at some point that ends up being replaced by a mantle. It becomes this sort of holy thing that can be passed on from generation to generation because of its value, and it's continued to push out interesting and important stories. But you're of the opinion that James Bond is not that.
Yep. I think that there's been a big struggle, probably post Cold War, to make. I think Bond is steeped in that sort of world where secret intelligence against the enemy, and the enemy is kind of clearly defined and everyone kind of knows it. That is where it feels most natural for the character of Bond. I don't think that it was a big coincidence that the Brosnan movies, and I don't know how you feel about Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. I mean, he looked the role, but just not given a whole lot to work with as far as the storylines. You know, trying to make that modern Bond still ring true to what it is. For a long time, the Bond franchise couldn't, because they did not have the rights to make the Spectre name and Blofeld name a villain for over 35 years. And that is tangled up. That goes back a long way. That goes back before there was even a film made, about when Fleming worked with Kevin McClory and with, I don't remember the third guy's name. I don't know if it was Cubby Broccoli as well. It might have been. But they worked on a screenplay for Thunderball. It kind of fell through. Fleming goes ahead and publishes a novel version. He reworks it. McClory sues, and it's still being played out in the 60s. They can use it then, but McClory is involved in Thunderball, essentially in further litigation, sort of wins the rights to it. That's why there's also that Connery 80s quote-unquote Bond film that McClory has the rights to do. It's not technically a Bond film. Bond fans don't necessarily view it that way. But you don't have we were talking about Superman. You don't have a Lex Luthor. You don't have a Moriarty. You don't have that eternal character, that villain that can play the antithesis as well. And I think that has been a big problem. And it's one of the reasons that makes this new movie so pivotal, and I think where they are wanting to push it. Because, go ahead.
So just to clarify, I don't actually know this. Are you saying that the Spectre narrative is really old?
I'm saying it was the major arc of the later Bond novels that essentially costs Bond his life in the books.
Really?
Yes.
So, okay, so I have to shift my understanding of how these movies have played out so far, because a lot of what Daniel Craig has done, it seems chronological and coherent in one storyline. But what you're saying is that they evolved Daniel Craig's storyline back into something that was enjoyed as a novel in the 80s.
Well, from the novels, those were the late 50s, early 60s, when that run of Thunderball, I can't remember where The Spy Who Loved Me comes in, and that one's off the beaten path, has nothing to do with Spectre, basically. Honor Majesty's Secret Service, and then You Only Live Twice. And You Only Live Twice is kind of the last. There's a follow-up novel, I believe, and maybe a short story, but
So are you
Uh,
saying that those are also Spectre films?
they are also Spectre films in the 60s. So yes, one thing maybe also to clarify here. This is the second time that the films have done the Spectre storyline. In the 60s, the original producers in Ion Films or whatever it was called at the time, Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, they did Spectre from they introduced Spectre in the very first movie.
Which
It's
was?
Doctor No. So Doctor No, which is a really great Bond film. It's really unique. It's stripped down. It's more investigative. Doctor No alludes to the organization that he's in, the Spectre. And by the second movie, so they extend it out. So in those books, Spectre is not the villain. It's not involved. This is where things get a little interesting because you can see that the films have never done really an adequate, not well, adequate, a representation of the novels as they're told because they're not because A, if they're out of order, but B, they also had to. Those were the books being done then. The books have been tremendously popular. It made sense to do that storyline. But in the movies, it's pretty unsatisfactory because there's almost no resolution to the Spectre storyline besides just sort of a comical. Um, it wasn't really serious. It was strange, and that had to do with the films, everything in the background of the movies.
So, um, so just to clarify, Spectre that came out 2 years ago, um, did that wrap up the Spectre storyline that was also mentioned in the 60s when they did those movies? Did it wrap something up?
No, because Blofeld's going to be in this new one.
And
Blofeld's
Blofeld,
not dead. So
sorry?
that's what I mean, because this is why I said that this movie is going to be very pivotal. It's the last Craig one. Blofeld returns. Um, Rami Malek is also playing a major villain. There's a new 007 that's going to be the partner, right? It's really, there's a lot going on, and it wouldn't surprise me if they try to wrap up this Blofeld Spectre storyline. Probably kill the double O.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So this is a huge change. Okay, so um, this is not going to play out like other re-renditions of classic stories like Oceans, Ghostbusters, um, and Men in Black. What we might be able to assume is that scene that's described in these rumors of a black woman walking out as 007 might not happen at the beginning of the movie. It could happen as the last scene in theory.
I maybe, but I'm thinking more so that she'll only be a one character or one film character is what I'm guessing.
After
Just
they just did like 12 years with Daniel Craig.
well, but she's not James Bond. Are they going to do the James Bond movies without a James Bond?
Well, okay, so then ask yourself this question. I suppose this is a very important question. At the end of the Spectre storyline in the books, which there is not a direct adaptation to in the movies, but they've laid credence to all the way through the narrative.
Because it's also important to note they're not going off of any books right now. There are no
No,
books that they're
but
transferring from, just to clarify.
right, but the transitions that they're making between movies is similar to how the Spectre books played out. Is it even remotely similar?
No, no.
Okay, well,
Because you'd have to
regardless,
redo those stories, right?
so that might not matter. But Regardless, at the end of the Spectre storyline in the books, when Bond makes a decision that costs him his life, is it assumed that his mantle of 007 needs to be filled?
So one thing is that Bond does not die, but Bond is he wakes up. Well, not wakes up. He kind of, after going through what he goes through with Blofeld, he's in Japan for You Only Live Twice for most of the movie, and he has to infiltrate Shatterhand's garden, I guess. And so he works as a fisher there for a couple months. Like, he works at it. He, at the end of it, loses all memory and believes he's married to this girl that he was pretending to be married to keep appearances.
Oh, so he fell into his own trap of a disguise.
But this was the man, and at this point in the novels, Blofeld had killed Bond's wife. Right? This was a story after the sort of a big a huge rift in Bond's life, and this is the second time that he has lost a hugely significant other, because Casino Royale, the first Craig movie, which Casino Royale, they could never get the film rights for a long time because CBS had control of them, I believe, because CBS did a hour-long TV adaptation in the early 50s that is the first Bond on screen, played by Jimmy Bond. Jimmy Bond is the name of the character in the TV program, played by why can't I remember? It'll come to me. But so Vesper Lynd dies at the end of the first novel and the first Craig movie, and
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so it would seem that
so you see how it's all somewhat, it's approximations.
Well, that's
They're
what I'm saying. Okay, so at the
yeah.
end of, so if you're to extrapolate what happens at the end of, is there a last novel?
You Only Live Twice, and then after is The Man with Golden Gun and Octopussy, but they're kind of, Bond gets brainwashed after You Only Live Twice.
Right, like you
And
said.
it's and this is what makes it sort of like just a real tragic, there's real like darkness behind it, is that he's sent to assassinate M in that story.
So
And then
this sounds way better than the film adaptations.
I believe so, but The Man with the Golden Gun, see, I got to pull up my timeline because I'm getting crossed up. And some of those later ones I've only read once, and I've never been able to.
Like, You Only Die Twice in Octopussy and stuff.
You Only Live Twice. Original.
Oh, You Only Live Twice.
So some of them I've read just a lot more than others. Like original, not that. Casino Royale I've read the most times because it really, you can just read it and it kind of stands alone. It's the first one, but there isn't necessarily an indication there's going to be 11 or 12 more.
Right.
So Ian Fleming. So we're talking Casino Royale. I believe that's 52. So here's the thing. So Fleming dies in 64 to put you in the movie universe. That's right when James Bond really takes off as James Film Bond, because Goldfinger kind of, what people say, creates the Bond formula for movies. That sort of pre-title sequence, the gadgets, the car, the sort of the women, all of it. It kind of, and where the first one is more detective-y, and the second one is kind of more Hitchcock and cramped and espionage. This one's more of the Bond. So Fleming kind of dies there. And I believe You Only Live Twice. So it goes Casino Royale, Live and Let Die, which if you want to, that's a racist book. There is one chapter, I believe it's chapter 5, that is called, I don't know if I want to say this in the first podcast.
Okay, well,
N-word Heaven is what it's.
That's the name of the
chapter. There's a lot of, he doesn't go hard on the N-word. It's a lot more Negro and stuff, but still, it's the dialogue, how these characters sound,
is really racist.
It's of its time. So Thunderball 61, and I did have it right. So The Spy Who Loved Me is like nothing to do. It's almost told exclusively from a female's experience. Bond, and this is what makes this kind of weird, because maybe they could have done something like this. Bond only is briefly in The Spy Who Loved Me, that Bond novel.
Really?
And most, if not all, of the story is told from this female's perspective. And she is, I believe, kept hostage, and Bond eventually saves her. But it's completely... And so Fleming got in a lot of trouble for trying to get into a lady's head and about what she thought about men and such.
Well, I suppose the assumption was, if I'm going to continue writing these books, perhaps seeing it from a different perspective would be beneficial, because there's a trope character who could be treated just as much of an anchor or a hero as Bond. So let's try and write about that experience, because we can get all of the same plot points, we can get all the same emotions and same feel through another character's eyes.
But it's more even just she's going through like a lot of her life. Like it's a bit of her life story. Like there's not a whole ton of she's held hostage, and Bond saves her from being raped by her captors, I believe. Or excuse me, so she's working alone. Yeah, and these two thugs hired by the owner are going to burn down this building she's in. And they tried to molest her. So You Only Live Twice, 64, after On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Then it's The Man with Golden Gun. So this was the one where he's brainwashed by the Russians. So this is after he loses all memory, after his wife has died. So he is basically sent in as a double agent, and I'm trying to remember how that plays out. But M sent him out to Jamaica with the task of, and they call it the seemingly impossible mission of killing Scaramanga, an assassin who's believed to have killed several British secret agents. And then there's the collection of short stories after. But The Man with the Golden Gun was published after Fleming died. So there's a little bit of doubt there. And with Octopussy and the Living Daylights, those are some of the short stories. And it's generally believed that Kingsley Amis wrote a bit as Ian Fleming for those. And Kingsley Amis did write the first follow-up Bond novel that does have a place on the Bond, I guess, original timeline, as it were. Anyway, I'm not sure what the point was, but only to
No, but
say
no,
that,
that's pivot. That's really important. So, um, would you say that any of the pivotal moments in Bond's life could have ever led to his position being handed over to uh, not only someone who's black, who may be British, who may not, but also a woman.
um, no. I mean, the woman thing, it's not that it's that it's purely entrenched in James Bond is this is what they used to say. He was the man's man. Men wanted to be him and women wanted to be with him. So it's if it's going to be James Bond, that is a key aspect to Bond. I mean, it's just sort of disingenuous to if we flip it on its ear, and she can be Jamie Bond or what have you. Um, I don't think that it's there's if there was a desire. I mean, there are spy movies with women in it. I
Great spy movies, like really good spy movies.
and she could be tremendous in this. She could be uh a great lead in another. It's like having an archaeologist and you say you want to have a female Indiana Jones, but there's Laura Croft.
Yes, and it's like, why? Like, you don't need to do that.
And Laura Croft's Laura Croft and Indiana Jones is Indiana Jones. And obviously they're not the same, but
But
why
if you
why should
made
they be?
Laura Croft into Indiana Jones, it would be really disingenuous because all you're practically saying is, uh, here are the similarities or the things that we can make easy to interpret for people who know one or the other or can who enjoy these characters. Here are the similarities. Here's why they're pretty much interchangeable, and they're not very valuable characters if you actually understand them very well, because you may as well just change out Indiana Jones, who has a great history and the way Spielberg wrote his past and included his family as well as his previous life decisions before the movies into the movies is just incredible. And to say that, yeah, all of that aside, it's actually a role that could be completely uh, lifted up and transferred over into uh, another character. So I completely see why this James Bond contention um, exists, because you're pretty much saying, we're going to boil down our character, and everything that can exist in anyone is what's valuable and what we're going to make movies about now. But really, what would be doing justice to a character and to the writing and to the history of the literature would be to say, no, it's not what anyone can be that is like James Bond. It's what no one else could be that is like James Bond.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all skills are at your disposal because it's a game of your life. And Bond is that as that character uses um, his sexuality. And I mean, there is that is if it wasn't. Here's the thing: there'd be a much less issue if that wasn't a major aspect of the character. You know what I mean?
Come
Like
up with an example.
um, if if Michael Scott is played in the next Office by a female.
That's a bad example.
Well, I'm just trying to think of some sort of much less. Uh, obviously he's sexually driven in some ways, but he's not. It's not happening for him. You know what I mean? Like it'd be less of an issue, I think. But
I think
Bond,
it's a bad example.
that's a bad example. I'll grant you that. But I think this comes part and parcel with the whole idea that there are no more Bond girls because it is meant to be. It is this evening the play of it's kind of a chilliness, I guess, to that of that Bond's just going to win the girl.
Yeah.
But
And
these
he'll
are,
die the next day.
yeah, and these are women, and they're not just going to fall for your, um, I guess, pedantic tricks. But he's going to try and seduce this agent he's working with. I mean, come on. And if it all depends on what the intended effect is. If it's just meant like that, you're going to actually piss off more people if he goes and beds the gal, which suddenly is almost like a minor thing to pay attention to.
What do you mean?
And well, just because there's I think this is um it strikes the Bond's masculinity, sexuality. Bond wins the girl. If she's the main female lead, Bond usually, and by usually I mean I'm trying to think of times he doesn't.
Oh, okay. Wait, I have a good example. Could I interrupt, or is that a good thought?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, so this will be relevant to our generation. Okay, yeah, this is actually obvious to me now. So, in 2011, there was a homemade CGI animated short about Samus from Metroid Prime and Master Chief from Halo choreographing this amazing fight in Halo 2 style. No, it must have been earlier than that because he used Halo 2 models instead of Halo 3 models. Okay, well, it was early on in the internet. And because Halo 3 hadn't come out, and because Samus was clearly a woman, which actually is a really old conversation that I know you probably don't know this, but it's actually very similar to this situation, because there was an expectation of what a character should be, and then it came out later from Nintendo after I think Metroid 3 or 4 that Samus, who you've been playing as, which is this character from these Metroid games, who's in this big suit of armor, who in every video game that was like it, you were playing as a man. It actually came out that she was this, or that Samus was this gorgeous blonde in this huge suit of armor. And so when this short came out, it was sort of understood that Samus was a girl and Master Chief was a guy. But there was this idea at the end of this short that was choreographed, I have to plug this, by Monty who was an animator at Rooster Teeth for a long time. He actually died, I think, of an embolism, or of he had a serious genetic defect, I think, and he died very suddenly. But at the end of this choreographed CGI fight that impressed so many people, by the way, that is pretty much what got him his job at Rooster Teeth, to be one of the most influential personal animators on the internet.
Red versus Blue.
Yes, yeah, Red versus Blue. Everything that was cool about Red versus Blue, especially season 6, episode 8, where Tech.
I love how you just dropped.
So there's these choreographed fights. Okay, this is beside Bond, but at the end of the first widely accepted thing that Monty did, Master Chief ended up being this blonde chick, and him or her and Samus end up making out at the end of this amazingly choreographed fight. So you have this perfect embodiment of Master Chief in this choreographed fight, which is like, man, I wish every video game was like this. It was so cool. And watching Master Chief not only battle Samus, but actually team up with Samus at the end, made for this like awesome, really well animated thing. And then it strikes this question that, it is not specifically clear that Master Chief is actually a man. It's not specifically clear. We never saw him take his helmet off. There are plenty of voice actors and different things that Bungie did with their properties that that made characters' sexuality ambiguous. A lot of characters that weren't sexually motivated at all, or aligned at all, rather. So it kind of toyed with people's minds before the end of Halo 4, when you saw Master Chief's eyes for the first time, that Master Chief might be a girl. And it didn't matter. You wanted, regardless of how you really wanted to go into Halo 3, and I know this might be a little bit of a cop out, but it is relevant. It didn't really matter who Master Chief was. Most importantly, because the act of making him a silent protagonist for the most part was actually to put you in his shoes. So that becomes the separation between my example of Master Chief and Bond. Master Chief is a character which has ambiguity, or a role that is not assigned, because anyone who wants to be Master Chief only has to pick up a controller. But anyone who wants to be James Bond, like you said, has these criteria. They have to kill in cold blood. They have to be a very prestigious and well vetted spy for MI5 or MI6, MI6.
MI6, yeah.
Yeah, and that is at the core of why I think it's disingenuous. Of why I personally think, with my limited knowledge of Bond, that it's disingenuous to do this to these sort of characters, because there isn't this openness to this character is everything about that character that is defined by his sexual or their sexuality and their motives can all be shaved off, because everything other than that is actually what the character is. Everything in their sexuality and character and experience isn't actually that important. But with Bond, it is. It's crucial. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, that's the conclusion that I've come to, and I have no prejudice towards the actor who's going to replace Bond. I don't care at all what she's doing. And hell, if it's a good movie, as someone who doesn't respect Bond the way that you do, it might even be one of my favorite Bond movies. I don't know, but that's not the point. And making a good movie may seem to be the motive of its directors and producers, but honoring and continuing a storyline of Bond that is genuine, I think should be a higher task.
So I think in this next movie, I still think there are questions. I don't know if she'll be replacing Bond necessarily. I think that's up in the air. But the main point, I think that's a great comparison. This is a bigger issue than Ghostbusters having a reboot with 4 female comedian leads.
Why?
Because Bond is a character with a ground history that uses his sexuality as part of his task in some ways, but also part of just who he is. And it's also part of his huge, the walls that are built up inside of him as a person who dealt with a tragedy as a young kid when his parents died, and drinks obscenely and smokes obscenely, and has a lot of these vices. He's a larger than life character. It is kind of, it's all or nothing, everything or nothing, which is his family's motto. The world is not enough. That there's a written history there. It's part of the character. It's not like having where, take the example of Ghostbusters, where you can redo a comedy, and I think people, maybe they had a right to be upset or not, but there should be more of saying, well, hey, more of a critical issue from a movie standpoint, saying, well, we're changing. Is it really Bond? And I think Bond's been suffering this for a long time is my larger point, because Bond in the 2010s, 20s, 30s, I don't know what it comes out looking like, but Bond, those types of attributes, I don't know if they still are as applicable, but it would almost be better to do them in a different way, to have a different history so that character can feel more.
Are you defeating your own point?
No, I don't think so. I think Bond. This is where my point is being the Bond series could probably end. Um, and you're going to get into an issue. It's going to be an interesting thing what happens after this movie, because I don't think they'll start a Bond with having being thrust in. What's the timeline going to look like? Because that was something that for almost every time they switched wasn't a major concern with how it was written in, because there was no real linear aspect to a lot of those stories. So you were putting on the suit and you were walking through and in the gun barrel, and you could be your own Bond, so to speak, but there was less of a carryover. Now with the Blofeld, what do they do after? I'm assuming it'll be kind of rebootish. Could be big rebootish. It could be something, but I think that isn't.
Could be completely different.
Yeah.
So let's wrap this up by answering two questions. Well, we're answering one question and then providing some information. Would you still be upset if they continued on a 00 series with a woman that wasn't at all associated with James Bond, but did have the similar properties of MI6 and,
Right. Not necessarily, no.
Okay. And then do you still have your list open of the Bond films?
The films I know by memory, the order, the novels.
Okay. List your top 3 movies and your top 3 books.
Number 1 film, From Rush with Love. I think it's I mean, if it hasn't been clear that I'm kind of an old fogey for the Bond, like I like Connery. I think Connery, but Bond being in a place and time, that's what it was happening when Bond was a big deal. And that I think it was a movie made chaotically, but it's really tremendous. And the novel was maybe the most well-written book. It was one of the only Fleming books that he did multiple drafts on and really kind of crafted at. And that would probably that's also in the top 3 for books. Second movie, probably On Her Majesty's Secret Service. George Lazenby's one and only performance as James Bond. Before that, he was a model, and he once acted in a commercial. He sold cars. There's a great movie, I can't remember what it's called. It's a documentary about George Lazenby that is extremely interesting, because after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, he was offered a 7-movie contract to play Bond.
And he said no.
And he turned it down. But he was, for a guy who didn't know how to act, did a great job. And that story is just a tremendous Bond story. It's also probably in my top 3 books. And then the third film, I'll probably say Dr. No, the first one, because it's really set in Jamaica. There isn't a lot of, he doesn't go hopping around the world. it's a big plot, but there's a lot of the ground setting that's really uh, interesting, and I think it's really solid. Yeah, I'll do that as my top three. But I think my favorite Bond novel is, I've read it the most times. I don't think I've read a book more than Casino Royale, because it is, I just get to a certain point, probably 60 or 70 pages in, and if I keep reading, I'll read it to the end
Cool.
in that sitting.
That's sweet.
It's really easy to read. It's, there's in nice dramatic, the first chapter sets the scene at, I think, what is the first sentence? It's like, there's something nauseating about the smell of cigarette smoke at 4 a.m. And it just gets you right in, sets the scene at the casino, and everything. And it's a really good thriller. But Moonraker is a really good book too. You Only Live Twice, Thunderball. But
Great.
yeah, they can only be honorable mentions. You're very partial to the Craig movies, right?
Yeah, they're all I have.
Yeah.
They're all I've seen from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Skyfall was the only a Bond movie that I saw in theaters, and it changed how I looked at cinema.
Yeah. Yeah. Skyfall, I thought was, I mean, I've liked the last two Craig movies. Like, I thought Spectre, I will tell you about Spectre a little bit. So I've only seen Spectre once. I left it thinking that's either one of the best Bond movies that's ever been made, or there's something I'm missing here. Or there's something off about it. I really almost can't tell, but there was a part of me that was really excited at the end of the last Bond movie, and I thought was really good. But I started to read a little bit about, because some Bond fans were really digging it, and other fans thought it was
Controversial.
a bit of tosh,
Yeah.
and kind of a lot of smoke, no fire. And so I've waited, and I want to watch the Craig movies in order and kind of build to it, likely in preparation for Bond 25.
Fair enough. Well, maybe I'll help you out with that marathon. But we're at 1 hour 10, so this will be perfect.
110. Beautiful. Yeah. I talked with the old, have I told you about Frank, who used to work at the Nugget? So Frank used to,
Frank, the old guy.
yeah, you might have met him.
Yeah, I might have. Man, yeah, he's incredible. Yeah.
So I called him up out of the blue last night at 9:00. He picks up, we talked for 2 hours. Frank's telling me, because last time we talked 3-4 months ago, he said, the world, I like all this news and stuff. It's just getting me frustrated, and I just need to get away from it. So I'm going to really read. He hasn't read a lot of fiction, really. So he was telling me about all the stuff he was reading. He's read most of Hemingway. Like, he read all the short stories of Hemingway.
That's incredible.
He was telling me about Elmore Leonard. Do you know the author Elmore Leonard? So I have Rum Punch. I have a copy of it because I recognize the name, but I haven't picked it up at all. He's like, "Wow, just read the first few chapters, get a sense of his voice." We're talking, and then he was getting like, who else did he say he was reading a lot of? We talked about David Foster Wallace. Probably returned to Wallace 3-4 different times, because, as you know, I'm partial to his style. And Frank, he likes a simple, terse way of writing, and and he hasn't read much Wallace at all, but he just knows of him, and he's sampled a little bit, and he's telling me, he's like, if I ever read Infinite Jest, I've decided I'm not going to read the footnotes. And I'm like, well, you have to read the footnotes. Like, there are some plot details that are in the footnotes. Like Wallace is screwing around with you a little bit. Like there are details that only become clear by the footnotes, but most of the footnotes are just the add-ons. They're just additional
Right.
add-ons, but that's part of the thing. He's like, well, but that's what his job's supposed to be. His job's supposed to be to make it clear, right? So he's just an old editor, right? But
Yeah.
it's no, it's
Wow.
good.
We got to have him on.
Yeah, we should.
Well, can we
Well,
just
he would.
for an hour and a half?
Oh, I think he might do it. I mean, we talked. We were talking news, and he was, we're talking oil, and we're talking uh, Oilers, and all
Of
the
course.
all the stuff. Which, praise the Lord, hallelujah! Who thought this day would come? Milan Lucic is gone.
Yeah, you weren't none too happy with him. Not a lot of people were, but yeah, he had a few. In light of the seasons that we've had, he had some pretty good seasons.
He had one maybe okay season. Like
we're not talking about it. We're at a minute. We're at an hour 15. So
all right, that dirty hippie. I believe it's that dirty hippie 1965 at Gmail. But I mean, I'm not sure what the channel's called. Instagram. We've got an Instagram. It's called that_dirty_hippie_show. No post yet, but there's going to be some sweet shit on there soon.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thanks for making this easy. We'll talk again soon.
All righty. Good night. Good luck. Thank you.